The battlefield lay in ruin, a graveyard of twisted metal and lifeless bodies stretching as far as the eye could see. Fires smoldered among the wreckage, sending tendrils of black smoke into the dusky sky, where the twin moons of the planet had begun their slow rise. The scent of burning flesh and ozone clung to the air, mingling with the coppery tang of blood. Scattered across the battlefield, the victorious resin soldiers moved with the casual ease of conquerors. They picked through the remains of the human defenses, tearing apart supply crates, scavenging weapons, and tossing the bodies aside like discarded refuse. Their reptilian faces, covered in overlapping plates of chitinous armor, twisted into amused sneers as they surveyed the carnage. One of them, a broad-shouldered officer with jagged ridges along his jawline, stepped forward, boots crunching over shattered glass and spent ammunition casings. His sharp, predatory eyes scanned the ground before he stopped, something catching his attention. With a lazy kick, he shoved a crumpled slab of debris aside. Beneath it, a human soldier lay motionless. His armor was battered and scorched, the dull gray plates marred by deep gashes and streaks of dried blood. A gunshot wound in his thigh had painted the ground beneath him dark red, and the cracked visor of his helmet barely concealed the bruises blooming along his jaw. Yet he was still breathing. The officer tilted his head, his ridged brow furrowing slightly. Still alive. Another resin soldier, younger and leaner, crouched beside the fallen human and nudged him roughly with the barrel of his rifle. "Not for long," the younger one said, grinning. "Look at him, he's finished." Laughter rippled through the group. The humans had fought hard, but in the end, it hadn't mattered. The Dominion had crushed their defenses, sweeping through them like a wildfire. And now this lone survivor was all that remained. A broken remnant of a defeated species. "Strip his weapons," the officer ordered, his voice laced with disinterest. "Take whatever's useful, then leave him to the sand." Rough hands yanked the rifle from the human's grip, unfastened his belt, and searched through the pouches on his armor. They pried a serrated combat knife from a sheath, held it up to the fading light, and chuckled. Primitive. Weak. But the soldier didn't react. His dark eyes, barely visible through the dirt and dried blood, flicked from one resin to the next. He didn't speak. He didn't flinch when they wrenched the dog tags from his neck, their sharp claws scraping against the metal. Another soldier, eager to entertain himself, prodded him again. Maybe he's already dead inside. A broken little creature, waiting for the end. The others laughed, their voices harsh and guttural. But one of them, a grizzled veteran named Vec, remained silent. Something was wrong. Vec had fought humans before, on more than one world. He had seen their desperation, their ferocity, their refusal to surrender even when death was certain. Humans were not like other species. They didn't cower. They didn't wait to die. They fought, even when it was hopeless. And yet this one, the silence, unnerved him. The humans should have begged for mercy, should have spat in their faces, should have cursed them with his last breath. But he did none of those things. He simply watched. Vec studied the human's injuries more closely, the deep gashes, the broken ribs, the bullet wound in his leg. He should have been writhing in agony, slipping in and out of consciousness. Instead, his breathing was calm, measured, controlled. Vec's mandibles twitched. His gut told him to kill this one now, to put a round through his skull before. "Superstition," the officer scoffed, shaking his head. "You think this one is special?" Vec said nothing, but the feeling wouldn't leave him. The younger soldier, emboldened by his commander's dismissal, smirked and leaned in close, grabbing the human by the collar. "Hey," AP sneered. "Got any last words?" For the first time, the human moved. Not much, just a slight tilt of his head, as if acknowledging the question. His lips parted, his voice raw but steady. "You shouldn't have done that." The sneer on the resin's face faltered. "What?" The human's hand shot up with terrifying speed, fingers closing around the alien's throat. There was no hesitation, no wasted motion. A brutal twist. A sickening crack. The resin's body dropped limply to the dirt, his lifeless eyes still wide with shock. For a moment, silence gripped the air. Then weapons snapped up, barrels trained on the soldier. The human rose. Slowly, deliberately, blood dripped from his fingers, but his posture was unbroken. His gaze swept over the remaining resin, assessing them not as captors, not as victors, but as prey. Vec felt a chill race down his spine. The officer took a step forward, weapon raised. "Stay down, human. This is your only warning." The human exhaled, as if disappointed. Then, in the dying light, he smiled. The resin fired. The air reeked of burnt ozone and charred flesh, thick with the acrid tang of spilled blood. The battlefield, once a stage for the resin's laughter, had turned into a slaughterhouse. Bodies lay strewn across the sand, their weapons discarded, their armor broken. The only sound now was the steady crunch of boots over shifting dirt, the measured rhythm of a predator walking among its prey. Vec's grip on his rifle tightened. His fingers trembled against the trigger, but he didn't fire. He couldn't. His instincts, honed over decades of war, screamed at him to run, to survive. But he remained frozen, his legs refusing to obey. Across from him, the human stood motionless. Blood dripped from his hands, tracing dark lines across his fingers before falling silently to the sand. His uniform was torn, riddled with burns and bullet wounds, yet he stood tall, as if pain was nothing more than an inconvenience. His breathing was slow, controlled. His eyes, shadowed beneath a mask of grime and dried blood, were impossibly calm. This wasn't just a survivor. This was something else. Vec had seen men fight for their lives before. He had seen them claw and scramble, their faces twisted with desperation, their bodies trembling with the knowledge that death loomed just beyond the next heartbeat. That was not what he saw now. The human did not fight like someone trying to survive. He fought like someone who had already made peace with death, someone who had lived in its embrace for so long that fear had no place in his mind. Vex swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the moment press against his chest like a stone. "You knew," the human said, his voice low, almost thoughtful. The words sent a chill racing down Vec's spine. "You knew what I was," the human continued. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. A quiet, terrible truth laid bare beneath the dimming sky. Vec opened his mouth, but no words came. Because it was true. The moment the human had stared back at them, silent and unmoving, Vec had felt it. That gnawing unease, that whisper at the back of his mind telling him that they had made a mistake. He had ignored it, dismissed it as paranoia. But now, standing in the aftermath, he understood. They had not beaten this man. They had not broken him. They had simply woken something that should have been left undisturbed. A monster in human skin. The human took a step forward. Vec's breath hitched. There were no more weapons between them. No more distractions. Just the two of them now, standing amidst the wreckage of the massacre. Vec's mind raced through possible actions, possible outcomes. He could raise his rifle, try to shoot. No. It wouldn't matter. He had seen what happened to the others. The human was too fast, too precise. Any attempt at attack would end with Vec's body lying lifeless on the sand like the rest. Running was an option. His ship was stationed not far from here. If he could just make it. But the moment he took a step, the human would know. He would hear the shift in Vec's breathing, the subtle flex of his muscles, the tiny tells that spoke louder than words. The moment Vec made a move, the human would be on him. And then it would be over. "You understand now," the human said. Vec exhaled sharply, feeling his mandibles twitch involuntarily. Understand? No. He didn't understand this human at all. The Dominion had studied humans, classified them, fought them. They were stubborn, aggressive, but ultimately fragile. Their bodies were weaker than many other species, their lifespan short, their homeworld unremarkable. They should not have been a threat. And yet, time and time again, humans had defied expectations. They had refused to kneel, refused to accept defeat, refused to stay dead even when the odds were stacked against them. They called it resilience. The Dominion called it a problem. And now, staring into the face of the problem made flesh, Vec realized something else. This wasn't just any human. This was the thing their generals whispered about. The thing that made Dominion officers wake up in cold sweats. The thing that turned battles into bloodbaths and sent entire fleets retreating in shame. The humans had a name for it, spoken only in hushed tones. Baba Yaga, the boogeyman, a myth, a legend, a soldier who never should have existed. Vec's mandibles clicked shut, his pulse thundering in his ears. "You're not real," he muttered, more to himself than to the human. The human's lips curled upward slightly. "You wish that were true." Another step. Closer now. Vec tensed. His heartbeat pounded against his ribs. Then, without another word, the human turned and walked away. Vec watched, frozen in place, as the blood-stained figure disappeared into the smoke and darkness, his form swallowed by the shifting shadows of the battlefield. The silence he left behind was heavier than any war cry, more suffocating than the stench of death. The others would come soon. Resin reinforcements would arrive, scouring the battlefield for survivors. But Vec knew the truth. There would be no victory for them here, because this wasn't over. The Baba Yaga had been awoken, and gods helped them all. The warship Crexon's claw hung in orbit like a waiting predator, its dark hull reflecting the dim glow of the planet below. Inside, High Commander Zelvier paced before the holotable, his claws drumming against the metal surface as he listened to the report. The air in the command chamber was tense, the officers around him shifting uneasily. A single human, an entire squadron wiped out. Zelvier's mandibles clicked in irritation. "Explain it again," he demanded, his golden eyes narrowing. The lone survivor, a battle-worn soldier named Vec, stood at rigid attention, though Zelvier could see the way his fingers twitched, the way his throat bobbed when he swallowed. He had seen that expression before, not the fear of a soldier who had faced death, but the fear of something worse. "It wasn't an ordinary human," Vec said finally. "It was something else." The officers around them exchanged glances. Zelvier exhaled sharply, folding his arms. "You expect me to believe that one wounded human slaughtered an entire unit? Trained warriors." Vec's jaw tightened. "You weren't there." "No, I was not. Which is why I struggle to believe that a single human." They called him Baba Yaga. Silence gripped the chamber. Zelvier stilled. The officers stopped moving. Even the hum of the ship's machinery seemed to fade beneath those words. Baba Yaga, a human legend, a nightmare whispered among Dominion forces, dismissed as superstition. A soldier who did not die, who did not surrender, who did not stop. The Dominion had lost entire battalions to ghosts like him. And yet, no one had ever confirmed his existence. Until now. Zelvier studied Vec closely. The soldier's gaze was steady, but there was something haunted behind it. A man who had witnessed something beyond his comprehension. "You're certain?" Zelvier asked. Vec nodded. "I watched him take plasma rounds to the chest and keep walking. I watched him break my commanding officer's neck like it was nothing. The others laughed at him, treated him like a beaten animal. They never saw it coming." His voice dropped to a near whisper. "He killed them all in under a minute." Zelvier turned, staring at the holotable, where a tactical display of the battlefield flickered. Red markers indicated fallen Dominion soldiers. The human's last recorded position was already shifting, moving away from wreckage, deeper into the wastelands. "You should have killed him," one of the officers muttered. Vec's mandibles twitched. "I tried." Zelvier tapped a claw against the table, lost in thought. This was a complication he did not need. The Dominion's campaign against humanity was supposed to be decisive, brutal. The species was already on the back foot, their fleets in retreat, their colonies in ruin. Yet time and time again, the humans refused to break. And now this. Zelvier knew the truth. This wasn't just about one soldier. If the humans realized Baba Yaga had resurfaced, they would rally. Wars weren't won by numbers alone. They were won by fear, by morale, by the stories soldiers whispered in the dark. If word spread that their executioner still walked the battlefield, then every human still breathing would fight like they had a god of war at their back. Zelvier could not allow that. Deploy the hunters, he said finally. I want him found before this gets out of control. One of the officers hesitated. With all due respect, High Commander, how many should we send? Zelvier's gaze darkened. All of them. Vec stiffened, his body tensing. You don't understand, he said. You think he's just another soldier, but he's not. You send hunters after him, and you'll only be feeding them to the abyss. Zelvier turned sharply. Then tell me, soldier, what should I do? Let him walk free? Let him become a symbol. Vec exhaled slowly. You should leave. Murmurs spread through the chamber. Zelvier narrowed his eyes. Explain. Vec hesitated for the briefest moment. Then finally he spoke. You think this is the end of the battle, he said. It's not. It's only the beginning. He turned his gaze to the holotable, to the red markers flickering where his fallen comrades had once stood. We thought we had crushed them, that we had broken their backs. But I've seen how this ends. He looked up. You think humans are weak, that they're fragile, that they should have fallen long ago. And yet, every time we push them to the brink, they come back stronger. Zelvier scoffed. You expect me to believe that? Vec's voice was flat. I expect you to believe your own eyes. Zelvier hesitated. Vec took a step closer. You don't understand what you've done, he said. You didn't just leave one man alive. You left a nightmare breathing. You gave him a reason to keep fighting. He paused. And you won't be able to stop him. Zelvier's mandibles twitched in irritation, but deep inside, a sliver of doubt crept through his mind. Baba Yaga. He had dismissed it as myth, as exaggeration. But what if it wasn't? What if the real mistake wasn't failing to kill the human? What if the mistake was ever thinking he could die at all? The command chamber was silent. Officers exchanged glances, some uncertain, others unreadable. The weight of Vec's words hung over them like a storm waiting to break. Zelvier inhaled slowly, turning back to the holotable. The human's position was shifting again, moving away from the battlefield, vanishing into the wilderness beyond the scanner's reach. He exhaled. Deploy the hunters, he repeated. But this time, his voice was quieter, almost as if he wasn't sure it would matter.